Well, everyone, I want to welcome you to a very special episode of Let's Talk Geopolitics. My name is Cyrus Janssen, and in today's important live stream, we're going to be discussing the latest updates from Iran with one of the best experts in the world. Now, the situation continues to evolve every single week. We're well into our fourth month of this conflict, and the most important thing is that the leverage has changed. The game has changed. We see many regions in the area are starting to be very concerned, and new reports this week have now shown that Israel has actually made an attempt to actually stop these peace deals. There was also another report that came out that actually came out and said that Israel is actually planning to attack several Iranian leaders who are actually going to the peace deals. And there are also rumors that a potential United States draft could be underway sometime maybe in the fall, and potentially a ground invasion. There's so many things that we have to discuss from Iran. And of course, we're going to be bringing in the expert. So joining me now is Professor Marandi live from Iran. And of course, my co-host, Alex from Reporterfy Media. Gentlemen, how are you this evening?
Thank you, Cyrus.
Thank you.
All right, Professor Marandi, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on this important day. I know this is a very difficult time in the country. I know the country is mourning the death of your supreme leader and his family, of course, that were taken out. Just if you could just give us a little update from your end, as far as the way things are going right now in Iran, and just kind of your thoughts on this weekend.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. The funeral processions began yesterday for ordinary Iranians. The day before, there were delegates from across the world, including China and Russia and many Central Asian countries and the Caucasus and the subcontinent in particular. But yesterday, the funeral ceremonies began, and we've had very large numbers of people attending. And this morning, there were the prayers where it was definitely in the multiple millions. I've never seen such a crowd. It was actually at some point, it was very well organized, better than I've ever seen before. But it was so crowded that I was just hoping that nothing happened and there was no stampede. Otherwise, it would have been very dangerous. So, but the funeral is ongoing, and people, if they go to media outlets like Press TV or Al Alam or Al Mayadeen, they have rolling coverage, and people are going there 24 hours a day in very large numbers. So, the irony of it all is that the United States carried out an assault with the Israeli regime and with this broad alliance or coalition of NATO, as the Secretary General of NATO admitted they were involved, and regional countries. This assault was to destroy the country in a couple of days, to bring about a collapse. And not only did it fail to do that, the United States and the Israeli regime and their allies and proxies lost the war. They lost the siege warfare, and they lost at the negotiating table. And today and yesterday, we've seen huge crowds gathering in the many millions to pay their respects, and they've united the country in a way which I have never seen before.
Yeah, that's amazing insight. Thank you so much for that. Alex, I want to bring you in. I want to pass it over to you to get our discussion underway.
Well, thank you. Professor Marandi, I want to extend my deepest condolences to you and the people of Iran during this week of national mourning. The assassination of the former supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, by the U.S. and Israel's government, I would say, is a horrific, lawless act of aggression. It is felt over here. I know the mourning over there must be just terrifying. It's absolutely sickening to see this, the toll this has taken on his family. Before the show, I was sharing some images with Cyrus, the heartbreaking sight of his little granddaughter's coffin displayed among the victims. I honestly don't know how anyone could hold back the sheer anger and frustration over what the U.S. and Israeli governments have done. I think, this desperate attempt at decapitation strike is just another failed attempt at the Israeli and U.S. regime and their attempt to regime change, as they call it. It completely crosses the line. And I just want you to know that we stand with you in grief and join in condemning this brutal violence in the strongest possible terms. And today, thank you so much for coming on to this program and helping us understand what is going on in that nation. We see things on our Western media that say the numbers are low, it's not that big of a turnout. We're going right to the source. You have said the turnout is absolutely astonishing. What is this? Does this turn the page for Iran now? Or is there just so much resentment that it's impossible to move forward?
Well, thank you both for your condolences. I think it's very clear with regards to the extraordinary numbers. Fortunately, lots of international journalists are here. Some alternative media journalists that have much more credibility than mainstream journalists. I was with Max Blumenthal yesterday, for example, and we did an extensive interview while walking towards the place where the 4 martyrs of Ayatollah Khamenei's family were placed, this morning when I went for the prayer, I was, and I know you don't know the geography of Tehran, but I was actually to the south of the complex where the prayer was held, and the people have to be to the north of the body to pray behind the prayer leader. And I and hundreds of thousands of people had no way of getting around the complex to pray behind the prayer leader. In other words, there were hundreds of thousands of us stuck to the south of the complex, and we just listened to the prayers because we couldn't participate. That's how crowded it was. And we were all, it was like, it was a very dense crowd. But all that aside, I think that ever since the start of the war and the U.S. and Israeli assault, and it began with, of course, the martyrdom of the leader and his family and some of his companions, but simultaneous to that attack, they massacred 168 little elementary school kids, mostly girls, in the city of Minab. And the United States has never taken responsibility for it. It has never admitted carrying it out. In fact, they've tried to blame Iran for it. They've tried to imply that the Tomahawk missiles were Iranian at some point. And it was so bad that when I think the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tried to claim that this was near a missile base, a Sky News journalist was actually there and was in the city of Minab for like 2-3 days doing interviews. And Sky News, of course, is by no means sympathetic to the Iranian people or the Iranian government. And he was so outraged that he said, we've been talking to people, we've been looking at around the school, the neighborhood, and there is no sign of any missile base. In other words, the Americans, they just slaughtered all these kids, and they tried to blame the victims. So this is what we've been dealing with since the war started. But I think this is a major turning point, because when you look at all of the events over the past few months since the attack, it's been all downhill for the United States. Obviously, the Iranians have suffered many martyrs, many factories destroyed, much infrastructure destroyed, schools, hospitals, apartment blocks brought down. In one apartment block, there were women volunteers in the neighborhood who were cooking for soldiers, and they brought down the entire building on those women. So, that's the sort of enemy that the people were dealing with. Yet, after this period of time, and with the crowds that we've been seeing in Tehran today, and later in Iraq, because his body will be taken there, and then in the city of Qom and Mashhad. So this will be a multiple day funeral procession, both in Iran and Iraq. I think what we're going to see is further signs that Iran has emerged significantly stronger, despite the destruction and the deaths, than what it was before. And the United States is significantly weaker. I mean, all these millions of people who gathered in Tehran today, and those who are going now and tonight and tomorrow morning and at midnight, all those millions of people who will be attending different parts of the funeral ceremony, they've been hurt by the war. They've been economically impacted by the war. Life is more difficult today than it was 4 or 5 months ago. Yet they were determined to go and participate, and they declared a holiday. So these people could have just left Tehran, gone to the beaches in the north of Iran, gone to the forest, gone to some other cities and enjoyed the weekend. But what they did was, in this heat of summer, they went, and you know how big cities are, getting around is difficult enough on normal occasions. Getting to this ceremony meant we had to walk for a couple of hours just to get there in Tehran's heat, which in the height of summer can be at 40 degrees. I think it was like 35, 36 today, which is rather good for the summer in Iran, which is okay. But the point is that despite all the hurt, people are determined. It's a show of force. They went to the streets both to commemorate the leader, both to show how they felt about him, but also in defiance of the United States, in defiance of empire, in defiance of those who imposed war on the people. And I think this is just going to make things more difficult for the United States in the days and weeks and months ahead. Because imagine you're an Iranian negotiator. You're going to the negotiating table, and now you have you've seen the millions of people going to the funeral. That is going to give you much more strength and much more leverage to deal with the United States.
Dr. Marandi, why would Iran even negotiate with the Americans at this point? I mean, they have proven to be savages. If you sit down with Jared Kushner, I nickname him the Undertaker, 48 hours later, you die by a strike. I don't see any motivation why the Iranians should even negotiate at this point. They have proven that the Strait of Hormuz has been quite a valuable strategic little device to use to slow down the Americans' approach. I'm going to bring up a graphic here, and I would like your insights on this. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's on our screen. So it's Iran-friendly forces and strategic nodes in the area here. I was really not aware until a gentleman brought this map up to me last week. But to me, really, Iran does hold the cards here with all the support in the area, the Iraqi support, the Syrian support, Israel on the side there. We have Hezbollah, Hamas, and then down a little bit below there, we have the Houthis. I mean, if anyone's landlocked, it is Saudi Arabia here in this one when it comes to distributing their oil. So I mean, for the viewers here, everyone just thinks that there's this country, Iran, and it's in the Middle East, and it's on its own, and it's got no support. But clearly here, visually, it looks quite powerful to me.
Well, except for Syria, it's all correct. Syria, after the Americans brought Al-Qaeda and ISIS to power, that changed. But even in Syria, Iran still has a lot of influence because the Al-Qaeda government really doesn't have that much control. They're very incompetent. They're extremists, and the situation in the country is horrible. And so many different groups which have been traditionally close to Iran, they still exist, but for the time being, they have their heads down. But you're absolutely correct. The Iranians and their allies, they control the Red Sea, they control the Strait of Hormuz, they have a presence a strong presence across the region. And what you said about negotiations is actually something that's debated in Iran and debated at the funeral and debated. I went to the funeral twice. I went yesterday evening and I went this morning. And some people recognize me because of my presence on international media and on shows like your own. And they would come up to me and they would even though I'm not a negotiator, some are mistakenly think that I have something to do with the negotiating team. I went once with them just to help with media in Pakistan, but I'm not a negotiator. So some would argue with me, why are we doing this? Why are we negotiating with Americans? And a couple of them one yesterday and one today were very angry about it, saying this is a betrayal, or this is stupid or foolish, or what in the world are you doing, and and that sort of thing. And it is a legitimate argument. There are many in Iran who believe that way, and many in Iran also believe that the current path that the state is taking is appropriate. There are different views, and that is one of the good things about Iran. And this is something that in the West people fail to understand, because Western media won't let people know this. At Iran, we have different political parties, we have different political factions. We have the media is very open. The critique and the criticisms of the government, of policy, are very severe, and people, especially with regards to the negotiations, have been very vocal. Many people have been very vocal about their opposition. What I would say is that while I agree with some of what they say, and I agree with some of what those who support the negotiations say too, I think both have valid arguments to make. I think that the reason why they're carrying out the negotiations are important in themselves. One is that Iran's friends, like in China, they want to see a deal, and so the Iranians don't want their friends in BRICS countries, regional countries, Central Asian countries to see Iran, which is the victim and which did not start the war, and they don't want them to see Iran as the problem. And so when Iran is at the negotiating table, regardless of the results, that helps. That helps Iran a lot. And you recall last year when we had the 12-day war, Iran agreed to negotiate, indirect negotiations, because Iran did not want to speak with Americans directly because of their mistrust. And so they were carrying out indirect negotiations, and then the Americans attacked. Now, in Iran, many people before the 12-day war believed that these negotiations will get us nowhere. And they were right. But they helped Iran's image immensely, because Iran doesn't have any, the media is in the hands of the West. And alternative media, of course, today has an enormous impact. But still, Western state media, Western corporate media, they have enormous influence, even though the number of people who watch them have been decreasing. But across the world, when they want to quote, let's say, when they want to gather news, they still go to these Western media outlets like in India or in Latin America or in the subcontinent or East Asia or West Asia. So they still have that sort of influence. And when it was seen that the Iranians were negotiating yet the Americans attacked, that strengthened Iran's hand uh, with regards to the global majority and global public opinion. And then before this war too, the Iranians repeated the same model. They agreed to negotiate indirectly. Oman was mediating. And again, the Americans attacked. The Iranian government, the state, they knew that the Americans were going to attack on both occasions. But they wanted to negotiate anyway so that they can be seen as the victim that they are. I mean, if they hadn't participated, then the Americans would have said, well, if the Iranians had participated in negotiations, this could have been averted. And this would have had an adverse effect both in Iran, because many people would say, well, yes, why didn't you negotiate? Perhaps we didn't have to go through this, unfair war, but though it's unfair, maybe you, through your mistaken, your refusal to negotiate, you're partially responsible. This is this is important. You want to have your own people on board, and you want to have the international community on board, especially, as I said, since you don't have the media on your side, the mainstream media. In this case, it's partially the same too. The Iranians wanted to negotiate because their friends wanted Iran to negotiate. Also, they wanted ordinary Iranians to see that Iran is not seeking war. It's not a warmongering regime, as they like to call it, and that strengthens Iran's hand. But the Iranians, when the agreement was signed, even though it was favorable to Iran, they knew that the United States had no intention of implementing the deal. And that is why Iran is also playing hardball. Iran, as you know, the number of ships that pass through the Strait of Hormuz are limited still. The Iranians are slowing it down. Most of the Americans are trying to force ships to go through. They're mostly tankers. So, but still, when you look at the number of ships that are going through, they are much smaller in number than they are in ordinary circumstances. So Iran has this leverage both in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. It's rearming itself. It's preparing itself. It sold a lot of oil during this ceasefire period, which I'm sure you have been following, because they had a lot of tankers that were stuck because of the siege. They filled the tankers, but they couldn't leave, and then they sent them off immediately as soon as the ceasefire deal was agreed upon. So they've been able to make a substantial amount of money, bring in new needs of the country, import them through their ports, which were shut down for a while. They've been preparing themselves for war.
I want to bring up a slide here, and I just want to know if this is true or not. This is the Iranian president. He is saying that he told the Iranian, this is allegedly now, this is a Western media source, so that told the Iranian supreme leader that he would resign from his post if he rejects the agreement with the U.S. Is there any truth to that?
Well, there have been rumors of him seeking to resign, but it goes back, I think, even before the war. He is the sort of person who I think he feels that he was very unlucky in being elected as president, because I don't think he ever expected to be president, and ever since he became president, he hasn't been the most fortunate of leaders. War and war after war, and sanctions and sieges and that sort of thing. This has never been done in public, and I don't think it was. There's been any threat to resign for a particular issue, like if this deal wasn't signed, that he would resign. But he does have that sort of personality. He's a person who I think probably regrets being elected president of the country. But that's not really what the ultimate calculations are. The Supreme National Security Council, the leader, their decision they were not going to agree to the ceasefire. I mean, they were not going to agree to the MOU. If you, I'm sure you recall, because there were significant differences between the Iranian position and the American position, and Iran refused to budge. And then Netanyahu bombed Beirut, and Iran was on the verge of bombing Israel. And then then Trump immediately capitulated and accepted key Iranian demands and filled that gap that existed between Iran and the United States. And that's what led to the MOU. And one part of it was Lebanon. Another part was the siege on the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans were going to lift it after a month, but they immediately lifted it. There were some substantial concessions that Trump gave in order to prevent Iran from striking Israel, and that led to Iran accepting the deal. So the deal wasn't accepted because anyone threatened to resign or the government had a particular position. At the end of the day, that event that caused Iran to accept the MOU was Netanyahu's foolish act in Beirut, and then Iran's response being imminent that caused Trump to accept the Iranian demands, and the deal was signed.
I've read this MOU, and I'm quite puzzled because it looks like Iran has won on every point here, and I'm going to focus on point 3 here, the economic and sanctions relief. Now, if I'm to believe this is the Americans lifting sanctions, now to do that, you would probably also connect Iran back to the SWIFT banking system as well. That money can flow, especially if you are supposed to sell oil in dollars. So it says the immediate oil export waivers, the release of frozen assets. It's their money. It's Iran's money. They should get back. $300 billion in reconstruction fund, permanent sanctions termination, and status quo safeguards. So to me, after all this horrific fighting, and for the U.S. government that says that they have a knife to the neck of the Iranian military, that agreement shows a much different story. So adding to that, what we hear in the West is we always hear Iran has inflicted 47 years of terror. So maybe first, if you could clarify what that 47 years of terror means, because I'm still trying to find answers for that. And has the U.S. Pretty much capitulated in this agreement? Or MOU, sorry.
What you stated, yeah, what you stated was, I mean, the agreement is in two parts. The MOU is in two parts,
Yeah.
and ultimately, if there's a final agreement, then you'll see some of these things happen. But at the moment, we're in the first stage, and so the U.S. is supposed to release $12 billion of stolen Iranian assets to lift sanctions on Iran's energy exports, and to lift the siege, and to end the occupation of Lebanon. So far, the Americans have done a couple of things. They've lifted the siege. They've lifted the sanctions on Iranian energy exports, but they haven't released Iran's funds. And I don't know if that is how that is going to play out. But the Iranians, on the other hand, they can sort of slow down the pace of shipping that goes through the Strait of Hormuz too. So Iran has its own leverage. If the Americans hurt Iran, the Iranians hurt the Americans. But ultimately, if all these are played out, then they go on to negotiate the nuclear program, which they're not doing now because the Americans haven't carried out their side of the bargain. They would negotiate the nuclear program and the sanctions, all the sanctions, and then we would have that final deal. But we're not there yet. I think I think the very fact that the Americans signed this agreement shows the weakness of empire. I think Iran obviously has the upper hand, although I don't believe this war is over. We are at war in a way. It's economic warfare. It's they're and in the Strait of Hormuz, and I mean on multiple fronts they're in conflict, and we could go back to hot war. So I would, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't. I'm not, but I wouldn't bet on war not. A military attack by the United States not happening. I wouldn't bet on that. I think there's a significant chance that by the end of the year, the Americans will attack Iran. And that's why the Iranians also wanted the MOU too. They wanted to be able to export oil, import goods, and prepare themselves for a potential war by the Americans. I don't think I'm sure the Americans would fail. The Iranians are more confident about their position today than they ever were before because they won a war against the United States and its alliance, and that gives the country more confidence, and also their experience in this war is going to help them prepare themselves for any potential future conflict. So I don't think the Americans will win a war, but I think that the Israelis may push them to war, or the Zionist lobby may push them to war. But about Iran in the last 47 years, one thing that I can tell you, I think last time we discussed that book, Going to Tehran, and I thought I advised your viewers to purchase the book, to read the book by Flint and Hillary Mann-Levitt. Both worked in the White House under George W. Bush. It's a very good book. The husband resigned over the Iraq War, so they're both knowledgeable scholars. They're American. They worked in the White House, but their book on Iran is very good, and it deals with many of these myths. But during the past 47 years, 3 wars have been waged on Iran at the behest of the United States. Saddam Hussein's invasion of the country, where the West gave him chemical weapons. I survived 2 chemical attacks, a mustard attack, and a nerve agent, I think in 1984, 1983, 1984, because I know the Iranian calendar. The Iranian calendar is different from the Western calendar. Then last year's war, the 12-day war, and this war. But Iran has never actually launched a war against a foreign country for almost 300 years. And so when they speak about terror, all you have to do is go to Iranian cemeteries, and you'll see that the dead from our war from Saddam Hussein, or last year's war, this year's war, or terrorism or armed insurrection in this country has taken a huge toll. And I did a walk through a cemetery, the Tehran War Cemetery, a couple of years ago, maybe last year, a year and a half ago, with Max Blumenthal, and I explained this in detail, and he published it on the Gray Zone. It may be worth watching if people are interested. And I explained that our graveyards are full of people who died because of U.S. policy, but the United States doesn't. Its graveyards are not full of people who've died at the hands of the Iranians. I mean, whenever the Americans complain about Iran, it's Afghanistan. Well, they occupied the country, and they have to attribute some agency to the Afghan people. Or Iraq, again, when they occupy a country, they do have to attribute agency to the people of Iraq. They can't just say it was the Iranians. They illegally occupied the country. And also Lebanon. The Americans blame Iran for the death of 240 or so Marines there. But the fact was that they were illegally occupying that territory, and the people of Lebanon wanted them out. In fact, they were there when the Israeli regime invaded Lebanon and ultimately they captured the capital of Lebanon, Beirut. And they were so brutal back then that President Reagan of all people, said what the Israeli regime was doing in Lebanon was a Holocaust. So, I mean, it's amazing right now, after what they've done to Gaza, in the Western media, they still won't call it a genocide. But Reagan said it was a Holocaust. And so the people of Lebanon were resisting foreign occupation. And Reagan, to his credit, did the right thing. After the soldiers were killed, he pulled out of Lebanon instead of doubling down like Trump and like this current regime in Washington. He just saw that this was not smart, and he immediately left. So it's not as if Iranian soldiers have been, or the Iranians have been, taking over countries surrounding the United States or invading them. The United States invaded countries in our region, and the people of the region resisted, and the United States wants to blame Iran for the fact that people don't like foreign occupiers in their country.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Marandi, you've provided us some amazing insights, and this is why we're so honored to have you on the show, because this is really getting down to the deep structural problems that we're seeing in just the framing in Western media. And I want to talk about a couple points you mentioned. You had mentioned, just the similarities. Actually, I find is very interesting, because Alex and I are both in China. We know that actually some similarities. For example, there's multiple political parties here in China. There is a very big expression, again, towards the government, if there's policies that need to be changed, if there's changes that need to be made. There's an interesting thing you mentioned about why Iran wants to negotiate. You talked about the importance of really helping out their partners. China is certainly one of them. The Iranian government has come out and saying that China will get special considerations in any new Hormuz fee agreements. So again, we're seeing that strategic shift. Again, China having a lot of leverage. This is something that I mentioned at the start of this war, that there was a big narrative being driven in the U.S. that this war is not about Iran. It's actually trying to weaken China. That's our goal, right? If we can cut off China, we're going to weaken them. The United States, we're going to emerge so much more powerful. And I said, no, actually, it's going to backfire. And again, you might find this funny. In China, we have a saying for Trump. He's called Tianguo. That's his nickname, which means to build a country. So a lot of Chinese actually say, thank you, Trump, because you're actually, every policy you do, whether it's the tariff war or launching a war in Iran that you can't win, usually backfires and actually helps China get better and stronger in the future. But you mentioned something important. You mentioned that most Iranians, or a lot of people, are believing that there will be an attack from the United States in the future. I think we've seen J.D. Vance, vice president. He recently came out and said that they're trying to use this MOU as a time to really stockpile the reserves of oil. He said he actually kind of gave some clear indication here. He said, if we can get those oil reserves back up in the future, if there's a conflict, it's not going to inflict this, pain on the global economy. So essentially, I think what he's really referring to then is, we're going to use the 60 days. We're going to try to gain as much oil as we can in those reserves, that we could potentially double down and launch another invasion and really an escalated conflict. I would imagine that the sentiment in Iran is that you have to prepare for an Israeli or an American attack in the future. What is the country doing right now, almost considering the fact that that it's coming? It's definitely going to come. I think we see Israel will continue to push the United States and Donald Trump towards this. Again, we have some experts saying that there's going to be a ground invasion in the fall. I mentioned that at the very start of our thing. So what is that sentiment, and how is Iran preparing for that next move from the United States?
Well, first, I just like to stress on what you're saying about China. And I've traveled to China many times, and I've traveled to Chongqing as well. And if you compare, it's a city that most people in the West have never heard of, but it is an extraordinarily advanced city. And compare it to any city in the United States or in Europe, it's decades ahead, in my opinion. And the same is true about many cities in the country. I'm every time I go to China and I visit a new city, I'm astonished, really, as to how developed the country is. And obviously, they must be doing something right. And probably one of the things that they're doing right is not engaging in wars. It seems that it has a positive impact on the livelihood of people in that country. I don't know why, but it seems to have a positive impact. Maybe if the Americans had spent all those trillions of dollars on war, instead of spending it on war, they'd spend it on the American people. Perhaps it would have had some sort of positive impact on life in the United States. I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up in the United States till the age of 12. I can't say I'm an expert on the United States, but as a child over there, the United States was what China is today. I remember when we went drove through the Lincoln Tunnel, and that was like extraordinarily advanced engineering technology that was used to create that tunnel. And when we drove through it, of course, it didn't seem much to me because it was like underground. So I was as a kid, I couldn't quite appreciate what had been done. But in any case, it was a major technological advancement at that time. The United States is the infrastructure that existed when I was a kid. It's still functioning with that infrastructure. And the Chinese, which had nothing back then or very little, now they are decades ahead of the United States. So the Chinese way obviously has major advantages over the American, and that attracts Iranians. That makes it a partner that is attractive to the Iranian people because they see that China is not a threat to Iran. In fact, Iran and China have had thousands of years of relations. The Silk Road linked Iran and China, both by land and by sea. And there is no history of war and violence between Iran and China. Yet, as I said, in the last 47 years, the United States helped attacked Iran itself 3 times. It also participated in Saddam Hussein's war against Iran during the last months. It carried out a coup in Iran. It supported the Shah. And you put all that together and compare that with what China has done to Iran, and obviously it makes China much more attractive. So that's one issue. The second is that, yes, when the U.S. Vice President makes such openly outrageous remarks that, yes, we're not sincere about negotiating. Yes, we're lying. Yes, we don't have the intention to have peace. We're just buying time. That is actually hurting the United States more than anyone else because it's telling the world that, you shouldn't trust us. It reminds me of what Pompeo said. We lie when he was the head of the CIA. He said, we lie, we cheat, and we steal. And Vance is basically telling that to the global. And there was a lot of coverage of when he said this, because people across the world became worried about war. And you're right, the Iranians are preparing themselves. They are expanding their underground military bases, their missile cities, their drone cities. They're building new missiles, new drones, using new technology, bringing in new technology into their missile and drone systems, and anti-aircraft systems and anti-missile systems. And they are rebuilding their stocks. They're replacing thousands of decoys that were destroyed by the Americans. Many of those decoys are Chinese made, and they're extraordinarily good. They even produce heat, so that and the Americans have and the Israelis bombed many thousands of decoys, which cost nothing almost for Iran and a lot for them. So the Iranians are preparing themselves for war. I'm not saying that war is inevitable, but I think the chance of war is quite substantial. I don't think it will probably last as long as the previous war, because I don't think the global economy and the U.S. economy can tolerate this. I mean, even if Vance wants to increase stocks, I mean, the global energy shortage is very significant, and opening the Strait of Hormuz for a few months is not going to bring things back to normal. I think that if there's another war, the fragility of the global economy today and in the weeks and months ahead will be much greater than before. And Iran is more powerful than it was back then. Economically, no. Iran has been hit. It is hurt. That's why Iran. One of the reasons why Iran had a incentive to sign the MOU so that it could export oil and help people in this time of difficulty. But if there's another war, I think there will quite possibly be a land offensive because after the ceasefire, the Americans brought in lots of equipment. And the Iranian military say that a lot of that equipment is for land offensives. It is for troops. And so but now it's very difficult for the Americans because it's very hot in the Persian Gulf. I'm sure you know the region very well. It's very hot and humid in the Arabian Peninsula. It's not at all good for American equipment either. But the sandstorms and the heat and the humidity. But after 3 months, when the temperature cools, there's a possibility that there will be an attack and a land offensive. But it's not going to succeed. And I think the only reason why the Americans would do this is because of what you said. And that would be the Zionist lobby pushing. Again, we have to go back to what Joe Kent said in his resignation letter. He was the head of counterterrorism, a Trump appointee. When the war started, he resigned and in his resignation letter said Iran is not a threat to the United States. Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. This is a war that's been carried out because of the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby in the United States. And so if there's going to be another war, it's going to be those same forces that impose it on the United States.
Cyrus, I just wanted to just jump in here for a quick sec. Yesterday, I had a meeting here in Chongqing with a gentleman that he ships furniture from China. And you and I, we host this show, Let's Talk Geopolitics, but it always involves the business aspect to it. This gentleman had said that he's been in the furniture business from shipping furniture into the Middle East for the last 10 years. And in the last 3 months, his business has been turned upside down. Containers that used to go to, for example, Qatar from the ports of Shenzhen or even Shanghai have gone up over 200% and still delayed to this date. He has not been able to ship. So we are seeing that there are going to be repercussions. Of course, the first people that get dragged out in all of this is the small business owners or mid-sized business owners. This is where it hurts. We saw what happened with Apple just recently here. Shockingly said to the market, look, with all the leverage we have in Apple, prices are going up, guys. And I think this is a direct hit to what has happened in this region. We see on paper, okay, the price of oil, it's down to 72, 74, but that's not landed refined oil. Is that refined for diesel, as you mentioned earlier last week? This has the ability, even if there's not a ground invasion, to still send ripples through the financial markets worldwide. We haven't seen the end of this, I will call it, trade yet. Now, another point, again, you mentioned China. The most important thing that I would like to ask is, China does have representation in the region there. It's first and only established military base in Djibouti. I mean, this is quite a strategic area here. It's there to secure its maritime Silk Road. It's also there to protect, of course, Chinese citizens abroad. And it's also there to, be there in case there are choke points. Dr. Morandi, has there been any mention of China's representation within that region? Does anybody even know that there's a Chinese military base out there in that region?
It is known that China has a base, but unlike the United States, which has 850 or so bases across the world. China has, I think, I'm not quite sure,
I think just
one,
one.
two, or
Yeah.
three bases. Yeah. So that itself is very significant. But one of the benefits that one thing that happened, and I know both of you know this, but I'm just saying this for your audience, is that Iran never closed the Strait of Hormuz, and it was only closed to the ships that were linked to the Kuwaitis and the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris and the Bahrainis, the regimes which were involved in the war against Iran. But Chinese ships or Russian ships, but it was mostly Chinese ships because they have a huge, their fleet is enormous. Chinese ships were always going through the strait, and except for a number of days where there was fighting near the strait, where it was completely closed. But throughout this 4 months, their ships have been passing through all the time, and that just shows that when you are not a country that wages war, that you are peaceful, that you want to do business, you reap the benefits. And Ansarullah, the Yemenis, the Houthis as they call them in the West, when they shut down the Red Sea because of the Israeli regime's genocide in Gaza, as I'm sure you recall, they allowed Russian and Chinese ships to go through. So it was only the West that lost out because of their support for genocide. So when you're a peaceful country, you benefit. When you're a warmongering country, you gain more enemies. So while the world has been hit hard by the war that was imposed on Iran by the United States, China itself suffered less because its shipping companies were functioning almost as they usually did. Not quite, but they were treated very differently. But you're absolutely correct. As I said earlier, the number of ships that are going through the strait are much fewer in number. I think they're like 1/3 to 2/5 of what we had before, and they're mostly tankers because that's what the Americans want most. But when you don't export helium, then that's why Apple gets into trouble, because helium is used. I learned this after the war. It's not as if I knew this beforehand, or what the limited information that I have about crude oil and diesel and all that. That's what I've learned during the past few months. But the shortage of helium, the shortage of all the petrochemical goods that are produced in the Persian Gulf, the shortage of fertilizer, all of this is going to have long-term consequences, and the shortages are growing because, again, there's a limited number of ships that are passing through the Strait of Hormuz as we speak because of U.S. behavior. If the United States had implemented the deal, if they had implemented the MOU, to be more precise, then the Strait of Hormuz would have been more open to trade. But the Americans simply cannot behave normally because the Zionist lobby will not let them do so. So if the Americans had forced the Israelis to leave Lebanon, and if they had and stopped the genocidal attacks completely, even though, they've stopped most of the killing, but they're still occupying Lebanon now. But if they had forced them to leave, and if the Americans had released Iranian assets, the number of ships that right now would be passing through the Strait of Hormuz would probably be double what it is now. So the American government brings it upon itself by obeying the Zionist, by being obedient to the Zionist lobby. And so while diesel, there will be a problem with diesel, but the other problems are going to be much more long term, and they're continuing to grow because as the helium shortages grow more, as the fertilizer shortage grows, as all these other shortages grow, that's going to have a very enormous impact on the world. So they may be able to, in the long term, ease the problem with diesel fuel, but other shortages are continuing to grow.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned there that was really interesting, and you mentioned the fact that China really likes to invest in itself, and the fact that because it has not been involved in a war, has been a very big strategic advantage for the country long term. It was very funny because we actually saw Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, actually come out and say the same thing. He said, "Imagine if Iran were to just invest in its country and not, be addicted to this war. Imagine what the country could be like today." And actually, it was very funny because somebody had tweeted that, "Wow, the jokes just write themselves." This is literally, how China has risen, and it's a question that all of us in America ask. If we, what if we actually invested back into the people? Because America is a great place. We have a lot of thriving businesses, but it's a big corporation, right? You have these billionaires and trillionaire now. You have everything is run. When we look at our president of the United States making billions of dollars in crypto schemes, and then saying this is great. Everybody wins in crypto. We want to be the king of crypto, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In addition to that, we can control the markets by whatever we say. And yes, I have my son sitting on the board, which is great because they actually work with insider information, because their father's the president. And it's just remarkable, this contradictions, the hypocrisy. And again, it's the average American that is just left and, not benefiting from this society at all, where agreed. I'm actually, interesting enough, Professor, I was in Chongqing last week with Alex. And so we had a chance to see that miraculous city firsthand. And like you had mentioned earlier, it is amazing when you have a country that just invests in itself and really doesn't have that addiction to war. Another interesting point I want to bring up, I want to make sure all of our viewers know, 92% of Israelis in a recent poll, this is Israeli media, have said that Iran has won the war. So that is the sentiment right now in Israel. Overwhelming majority of people, and again, 92%. That is not any other source. That is a direct source from Israeli news saying that the sentiment there is 92% feel that Iran is in a much better position. So I think we're looking at a very interesting time here. We're seeing that Netanyahu, his popularity in the country is going down. They obviously are continuing to occupy Lebanon. What is the opinion right now, with the Israelis? And, is there a big worry that they are going to be the biggest hurdle to any type of long-standing peace in this region?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. And but the problem is that Netanyahu has just really done more damage to the Israeli regime than Iran or anyone else could ever do. Netanyahu has, in order to stay in power, he needs crises. And that's why these multiple wars continue. But what it has done is that it has destroyed the Israeli regime's image across the world. It's seen as genocidal. The global economic problems that we're seeing emerge today, they're being blamed on the Israeli regime. Americans don't like Israel. Young Jews in the United States don't like Israel. We saw the Democratic Party's primary elections in New York, how in Jewish neighborhoods, candidates that were pro-Israel, they all lost. It was a clean sweep. And Jewish and anti-Zionist Jews were voted in, and others who were anti-Zionist. And the United States much better than I. New York has a very large number of Jews, the Jewish population. So, and this is very much to the credit of young American Jews and many older Jews, but primarily younger Jews, because not only are they propagandized like all other Americans, it's the most propagandized country in the world, to support this genocidal regime, but they're also propagandized from within their own community. The Zionist lobby, the Zionist institutions in the United States, they're propagandizing their own youth, Jewish youth. But despite that, you see them turning against this regime. And so this is terrible news for Netanyahu. It's terrible news for the Zionist project. And I think that the longer this continues, the worse it becomes for the Israeli regime, and the closer it. I don't believe the Zionist project will last. But I think that the Israeli regime, especially under Netanyahu, will continue to push the United States towards conflict. If Netanyahu is removed from power, the alternatives are just as genocidal as he is, but that may that change may provide them with an excuse to back down in Lebanon and on other fronts, and to blame Netanyahu for the failures. But we'll see. But for the time being, I think that the Israeli regime will continue to push the United States towards greater war. But there's also another factor that's very important, and that is Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is becoming a much more dangerous war. And as you know, the Iranians supported the Russians from the beginning for a host of reasons. The Iranians did believe that the coup in Ukraine and the assault on ethnic Russians in eastern and southern Ukraine were immoral, and that the regime was not legitimate. But also, Iran was opposed to the expansion of NATO, not because, I'm sure you recall, alongside NATO there was also Georgia that was supposed to become a part of NATO. And then if Georgia had joined, then it would be Azerbaijan and Armenia. Then Iran would have been effectively surrounded by NATO to the north and to the northwest, because Turkey is, of course, a NATO state, despite Erdogan pretending to be independent, but he's very much in the NATO camp. So Iran supported Russia, and if you recall, the first place where Iranian drones became famous were in the war in Ukraine. And I should also add here that the West was always ridiculing Iran for its drones once upon a time, and its missiles, but these underground cities and these drones and missiles, and Ayatollah Khamenei, he created this defense strategy. This is what led to the defeat of the superpower and its coalition. But Iran's drones began to be used first in Ukraine. So the Russians supported the Ukraine. The Iranians supported the Russians. The Russians also have supported Iran. And now, with intensification of the war in Ukraine, I think that's going to have an impact on our region too. It's going to make it more difficult for the United States to deal with both conflicts simultaneously. And I think both the Iranians and the Russians will be coordinating in some way or form in the way in which they conduct themselves and their military and their alliance and how they work with their allies in Europe and in West Asia. So it's going to be, I think, even if the Americans want to revive war against Iran, it's going to be more difficult if the Russians are going to intensify the attacks on Kiev, or advance on Kiev or Kyiv or Odessa and other parts of Ukraine. I think this year is going to be the next few months in Ukraine are going to be decisive. I think that the Americans are going to be, and the Europeans are investing a lot more than before, and the Americans are investing a lot more than we're being told. From my understanding, the CIA the Pentagon has sort of pulled out, but the CIA is putting a lot of resources into Ukraine. So I don't think it's an ideal moment for the United States to go after Iran again, for all these reasons. The global economy is much more vulnerable because of the war, and another war could sink the global economy very easily. But at the same time, Russia is determined to bring about a change on the Ukrainian front.
Yeah. Professor, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you mentioned about the image of Israel and kind of the movement in the United States. It is July 4th in the United States, and just yesterday, obviously, big 250-year celebration. And it was interesting. I was on Instagram, and I was looking at some political content and just going through some videos, and it was very interesting, the kind of sentiment that I had saw in there, where a lot of Americans said, we're supposed to be celebrating our 250th birthday, but I feel we're in occupied land. We're ruled by this small country in the Middle East that owns our politicians, owns our government, determines our foreign policy. I'm not really sure how I feel about celebrating this country on our important day. And and I also saw some more positive reels where there was an Instagram reel that was very interesting, where it was a Jewish man in New York, and he was on a playground, and he said, you finally meet another Jewish man that is not a Zionist, and they both opened their T-shirts up, and they had the Free Palestine. And so you're seeing the kind of engagement on these posts are hundreds of thousands of likes, tens of millions of views. And I'm like, wow, this is a big change. And we see the polls coming out for young Americans, the favorable views of Israel declining steadily. With that, you mentioned that the elections happening in New York, where the pro-Zionist candidates, all of them losing across the board, clean sweep. So I think that Israel has a very difficult PR program right now, trying to sell their vision, or trying to sell whatever it is they're trying to sell. American people are not buying it right now. And there's a big change that I'm seeing here. You look at that, you factor in the Ukraine war, you factor in, like you mentioned, the global economy. This is not a good time right now, strategic wise, for the United States, if they're going to try to escalate this conflict. And like you said, Iran has a lot more leverage than it had, on February 27th. The game has changed, and that Strait of Hormuz, that never really was, a part of the equation, now seems an inevitable part of the equation, for the Iranians, for the foreseeable future, probably forever, really, if we're being honest. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting second half of the year as we're looking into these conflicts continue to develop. And just want to say thank you so much for your absolutely incredible insights. I'm going to pass it back over to Alex to kind of close this out. And you've been so generous with your time. I know you're a busy man, especially attending these funerals multiple days. And I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to just listen. Most importantly, learn from you as well, Professor.
Well, thank you.
You're
for
very
that,
kind.
Cyrus.
It's a great pleasure being on your show.
And thank you, Dr. Morandi. I just wanted to mention one more thing. Your point about the escalation going on in Ukraine. I've been down to the Donbass, to the front line last May. I've seen the horrifying attacks that were, shot on the eastern part of Ukraine. And I asked I got in quite a heated discussion this week. Cyrus was there. We won't mention with the other party, but it was a discussion where I simply said, when a missile is shot from Kiev and it lands into the eastern part of Ukraine in the year 2014, where's that missile landing? In Russia or Ukraine? And it is Ukraine, and that is the end of the argument from that one there. Moving forward,
we all remember, and sorry for interrupting, right after the coup, what happened in Odessa and how they burned people alive in a building simply because they were opposed to the coup, and they were Odessa is ethnic Russian for the most part. So it's clear what they were doing to the Russians. And I hate war, and I rather the war in Ukraine and all wars come to an immediate end. But at the end of the day, the Russians have much more justification for this war in Ukraine than the Americans have against Iran. The Americans have absolutely no justification when, as I said, this is the third war that they wage on the Iranian people, and they helped chemical weapons, Saddam Hussein being provided with chemical weapons, and I survived that. It's something very personal to me, but even Joe Kent, someone who was close to Trump, said there's no justification at all. And the thing is that Iran and the United States could have had a very different sort of relationship, despite the past. If the United States had behaved differently, we could have had normal relations. We could have had business ties. In Iranian schools, our second language is English. Many young Iranians go to the West to study. Many Iranians have relatives in the United States. There is, the cultural influence of well, Hollywood less nowadays than before, but in previous decades, when Hollywood was perhaps more effective and more attractive, U.S. American cinema had a great deal of influence. American music had influence, but they chose the path of confrontation, and it's again goes back to the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime that pushes these two countries in this direction, and it's only costed the American people, it costed the Iranian people the lives of their children, but the American people have lost financially a great deal as a result.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Morandi, and we will check in with you in the next few weeks. Hopefully everything's going to be calm over the next little while here. And again, we mourn for your nation that is going through a difficult next few days. I appreciate your time again. And once again, we will do everything in our power throughout our new media or alternative media to bring these horrific things that have happened here over the last few months to light so that the viewers can see it in a more balanced way. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Alex,
Yes?
another fantastic discussion with the one and only Dr. Morandi.
I'm just always amazed.
Alex. Yeah, I mean, it's always, I think it's an educational lesson for us as well, as we're always trying to bring in the experts and really try to get you guys the best insights from on the ground. And, it's really amazing when you can connect with the professor from the University of Tehran who's on the ground, again, attending the funeral, not once, but twice, hundreds of thousands, some people say millions of people, really attending this, funeral procession. It reminded me of, in Singapore, when Lee Kuan Yew died, 80% of the country showed up, to celebrate his life. And I think it just shows, there's a lot more than what we get exposed to in the West. I mean, Alex, a big story that just happened today, you and I were talking about this earlier. Europe has now passed a law that says anybody that if you are to be able to reshare, if you even as something as resharing or posting anything from Russia Today, RT, you are now going to potentially be arrested for that. So this is a blatant violation of free speech. I mean, we basically said there is nothing that is able to come from RT, and that is remarkable. I saw some big Twitter posts on this today. I was doing some research on that, and it's just quite amazing how they are going down this road of the censorship. But, we're grateful for alternative media. We're glad that we can have YouTube channels like this and, programs like Let's Talk Geopolitics that we guys can bring you the insights that you're never going to find on the CNN and BBC.
Cyrus, I just want to bring in one last point here. We spent a few days here in Chongqing together, got some great video content coming out. Not going to give it away, guys. Not going to give it away at all, what we get up to here in the city, but you will see it come out on the platforms here. But Cyrus, when we did our walk around the city, I just want to bring in a slide here. Chongqing automakers report strong H1 growth. Chang'an is a very popular company here in Chongqing. It delivered, and we're always hearing this, over capacity, as we hear, 1.19 million vehicles in the first half, with overseas deliveries up 35.1% to 402,000. Series sold 196,580 vehicles, while its NEV business grew 3.8%, driven by Ito models, which I personally been in. They're amazing, and Huawei-backed smart EV technologies. I just want to say again, we see these vehicles everywhere in the city. We hear the same old narrative from, Western media, the same punchlines, overcapacity. China's potentially dumping these cars on the market because they're massively subsidized. Hey, my mom's in the market for a subsidized car. Bring it on. I mean, your thoughts. We walked the streets of this city for a few days. How is your feeling about Chongqing? Every year you come back. This year, what was it, a year later or second year later? Time flies, I can't remember.
Yeah. I mean, guys, we do have a really great walk and talk that we did in Chongqing, and it's spectacular. We, have some really great footage for you to share with you guys, and that'll be coming out here within the next week or so. But Alex, I think Professor Morandi really hit the nail on the head there. When you are standing in a city like Chongqing, I'm going to go on record and say it's one of the most spectacular skylines in the world. I think it can compete up there with any skyline that you'll find. But it's more importantly, Alex, we hear those things like, Chinese can't innovate. They have no creativity. They're a copycat nation. And you look at that skyline and you look at the topography of the land. It's one of the most unique cities in the world, just on how it's built on the side of mountains. So you have all these staircases and unique architecture that is really uniquely Chongqing. But it's impossible to stand where we stood, looking out on that skyline and not just be amazed at what China's been able to build there and how popular this has become. I mean, we saw loads of foreigners. There were so many foreigners in Chongqing, people from around the globe coming to that city, really wanting to experience, the new modern China. A big testament to you and your team there. I know you've been personally, working hard, with Chongqing and putting that on the map in social media for the last 5-6 years. But, Alex, it's amazing because we hear the overcapacity, and I think overcapacity is one of the biggest false narratives in geopolitics today. Every country has overcapacity. The United States of America has an overcapacity of iPhones, hence why we sell them to countries around the world. France has an overcapacity of Bordeaux wine. Norway has an overcapacity of salmon. We can go down the list. I mean, this is basic economics, guys. But, a headline that caught my attention, Alex, was, China has a personal assault on the German auto industry. They don't have an assault. It's not like China is going out there saying, let's take down the German auto industry. It's just the simple fact that the Chinese, 25 years ago, Alex, again, around the year 2000, maybe 99, 2000. So 26, 27 years ago, China set out and said, look, we want to be the world leader in electric vehicles. This is not a decision they made, 2 years ago. This was nearly 3 decades in the making, and they invested. And don't forget, they also invested the biggest successful EV company in the world, Tesla. And they had Elon Musk be a very big part of that ecosystem. And so again, this is the strategic thinking of China. It is definitely the long-term vision. And I think it's exciting because the biggest thing is I went to Azerbaijan last year and drove a BYD for the first time. Fantastic automobile, super popular, even in a country like Azerbaijan that has tremendous oil. So, the cost of petrol is very affordable, very cheap in Azerbaijan. Even that said, the electric cars, much less maintenance, more reliable. They can't keep the cars on the shelf. When I was filming that video, Alex, it was funny because I was like, what about this model? What about this model? It's like, yeah, we can't keep one in the showroom because as soon as we get one, it's out the door. So we can't have that in your video, Cyrus, because we don't have one. As soon as it comes, it's out the door. But it's exciting. I mean, I think, guys, Alex and I are very passionate about telling China's story. Obviously, we host Let's Talk Geopolitics to talk about everything from Russia, Ukraine, obviously the Iran war. We've had an unbelievable thing of stories, Alex. I mean, Venezuela. We've had, it was a Greenland as well, potentially under attack. I mean, we've had so many different stories. We feel like a decade worth of geopolitical stories in the first 6 months. And it's not slowing down.
Totally agree. And,
so we gotta,
Dr. Morandi mentioning the Ukraine conflict, I think that's a definitely cue for me to resend my email to Mr. Ritter to cue him up for next Sunday. Scott, if you're watching, we need you here, buddy, next Sunday. But don't worry, if Scott's not in the seat, we got somebody else that can stand in for him. But my goal is to get Mr. Ritter on the program next week. Cyrus Janssen, what an amazing pleasure to have you here in Chongqing. Miss you already, buddy. I'm going to let you take the show out, okay, pal?
Sounds great. Well, everyone, I just want to say, let's talk geopolitics. We've been very consistent over the last 3 months, building the show up. A lot of effort, for Alex and I and our team, to try to bring you guys the best graphics, the best quality show. A lot of great comments tonight from people saying, look at the quality of guests you're bringing in, the video production. This is our passion. We want to help tell China's story to the world, but also, break down the biggest trending geopolitical stories. I do have a really important video out. So it's coming out tomorrow night, basically about, 22 hours from now. It's about the AI race between the United States and China. I did a ton of research on this. I'm really excited to bring this story because I believe that China is going to pop America's AI bubble. I have some absolutely fascinating data behind this. I really did a deep dive into this, Alex, and I'm super excited. So guys, make sure you come back tomorrow night. Check out this new video on my channel. I'm super excited to launch this because, China is winning the AI race. And if you don't believe me, I've got the data to prove it. And I've got a banger video that's coming out tomorrow. I'm so excited to, share that with everybody. But yeah, we're going to try to reach out to Scott Ritter, get him on the show for next week. If not, we're going to get another high quality guest. But most importantly, we're going to bring you guys the best insights that you need. So if everybody can drop us a comment down below and just help us get out the stream so we can continue growing Let's Talk Geopolitics into, the top geopolitical show that we're going to come and bring every single week for you guys. So without further ado, well, guys, let's go ahead and roll that outro. And thank you guys for spending your Sundays here with us. And we look forward to seeing you all in our next episode soon.